Nice. All right. Get him, Carrie. Get him.
There's one particular spot out there, and you have to be spot on it to do
Yep.
it. One spot.
That's how you those deeper jigs, those deeper fishing. That's a good healthy fish.
That's a healthy fish. Oh yeah, I had him that time. You weren't going nowhere. Look at that.
Nicely
Jig
done.
Fishing. Woohoo! One more and Mama gets a beer.
Hey folks, Glenn May here with BassResource.com. Today I want to talk about catching fish during the late fall. Like what's the approach to that and what are the main lures to use? So what I'm going to talk about is the top considerations that you need to think about during this part of the season, and then how do those lures and presentations tie into that? So let's get into that. First of all, in the fall, in the late fall, there's 4 key considerations you need to think about. It's water temperature, depth, it's fronts, weather fronts, and lure color. So first one is temperature. The thing about the fall, and especially in the late fall, is you rise and shine in the morning and gosh, it's cold out. This morning it was 46 degrees out. So it was cold. Now it's almost 70. It's nice. But you get out there and you're bundled up and you feel like it's winter almost. You can see your breath. There's a good chill in the air. And you might think, okay, these fish are lethargic. They're not moving around much. They're probably going to be deep. I got to fish for them deep. Pay attention to your temperature gauge, because a lot of times the water temperature is still up in the 60s, maybe even the low 70s. And the fish are going by that. That's their reality. And if the water temperature is that warm, they're going to be up shallow right away in the morning, even though you're cold. Maybe even this fog is out and you're like chills, but you're catching them on top water. So believe that temperature gauge. It's real important, because you might miss a lot of fish if you're fishing by the way you feel the air temperature is. So that's rule number 1. Number 2 is depth. In the early fall, the fish move up shallow. They are going crazy, getting a bunch of bait fish, and they're eating heavily. But what happens mid and into the later part of the fall, the days get shorter, the air cools down, the water temperature cools down, those weeds start to die off in the shallows. And when they're dying, they're consuming oxygen rather than creating it. And so that's going to push all those bait fish and the bass out deeper water to greener weeds. So the first thing you want to do in this part of the season is to find the green weeds. If your lure is dragging up brown or dead weeds, get out of there. Go deeper until you start dragging up green weeds, because that's where the fish are going to be. So that depth is real important. Also, keep in mind that weather systems are going to affect it. And this is where I get into the fronts. This has to do kind of, it positions them as far as depth. They kind of intertwine here. Early in the fall, the first fronts that come through aren't very strong. They usually don't have much of an effect on the bass at all. But as fall progresses, the fronts get stronger and stronger, and they have a greater impact on them. The water temperature drops to a greater degree. The barometric pressure drops more. And so a lot of times what happens is the fish will be up on those green weeds, actively chasing fish. Front comes through, and what happens, especially like the shad, will do this. They'll move out of the weeds, and if there's a nearby creek channel, they'll get right down in the middle of that creek channel. They'll hunker down in the deepest part of that creek channel. They're not going to move all the way out to the main lake, but the deepest area nearby is where they're going to go. And that may be only 20, 30 yards from that weed bed. So don't go running off chasing them somewhere else. But it's going to determine their depth. And the strength of that front is going to determine their disposition. If it's a real strong front, those fish may almost get lockjaw. They may be unwilling to chase down fast-moving baits, and you have to go to real slow-moving bait to go after them. We'll get to what baits to use in a second, but it's something to keep in mind. If you've had a long stretch, 3 or 4 days or more without any fronts coming through, then those fish will move back up into those weeds again, and they'll be shallow and actively chasing fish. So the progression from shallow to deep water is not linear. They're going to be shallow one day, deep the next, deep a few more days, now they're going to be shallow again for a few days, then they're going to be deeper. The trend over time will be a general transition to deeper water. But keep in mind, with the But the depths are where the green weeds are, and with these fronts coming through and the water temperature combined, those fluctuations is going to determine where those fish are during this late part of the season. Now, to me, this is, the fall is one of the more important times of the year to pay attention to lure color. Earlier in this season, the fish are up there shallow chasing shad, or they're chasing a lot of perch if you don't have shad in your lake, or sculpin or what have you. But as time progresses, what I've noticed is that the shad become less and less an important part of their diet. And it's not eliminated, they still feed on the shad, but what becomes more folded into their diet is bluegill. And because of that reason, chartreuse becomes an important color to have. I usually have a splash of chartreuse on whatever lure I'm using, especially in the late fall, whether it's a spinnerbait, a jig, or especially a crankbait. Fire Tiger crankbaits during the fall are like candy. It's crazy. I'll throw a Fire Tiger crankbait in the spring or in the summer and not do very well, but in the mid to late fall, hang on, those fish will slap the paint out of it, man. They'll hit it so hard. It's because of that transition, going after those more perch, going after the bluegill. I believe it's that Fire Tiger is why it's so popular during this time of the year and why it works so well. So chartreuse color is real important during this time of the year. But there's another one. Look at
Awesome.
that. This is ridiculous fishing.
We like it.
These fish love this finesse jig.
Well, they're trying to get fat for the winter. So
This is another
crawdad,
good one.
Crawdad.
Look at this. It's another keeper here.
Well, they're all about the same size,
Look
aren't
at
they?
I swear I'm not catching the same fish over and over again.
Sure does look like it though, doesn't it?
Yeah, finesse jig. Here you go, buddy. Now let's get a little more into the baits and a little bit more going after these fish. Like I said before, they're up shallow. Now we're mid-fall, we're getting into late fall. So these fish are going to go where the green patches of weeds are. So there's a couple ways to attack those weeds. One of them is with a crankbait. Like I mentioned, a deep diving crankbait is what you're going to need. And the problem with going after fishing weeds with a deep diving crankbait is that you can get it hung up in the weeds. So you want to get out to the outside edge of those weeds, the deeper part of those weeds, but you don't want to get so far away that you're away from the strike zone. You want to get those bass that are kind of cruising along the edge of those weeds. So the sweet spot is where you're occasionally picking up a couple of strands of weeds here and there while you're cranking it, while not dredging up a whole bunch of weeds. So you have to position yourself till you finally get to that sweet spot, but that's where you want to bring that crankbait right down in there. Give it frequent pauses and little twitches, speed it up, slow it down, change cadence, and you're going to catch a lot of fish that way. Now, what I've also found is if you've got patches of weeds, instead of a big flat, big expanse of weeds, if you've got patches of weeds, I find that a lipless crankbait works better there, because then I can bring it over the top of it. I can actually get it hung up in those weeds a little bit, give it a hard yank, rip it out of those weeds. It'll rip the weeds off of them, and that sudden motion, that burst of energy often triggers a strike. So I do that, I attack them that way. Plus, I also attack those patches with spinnerbaits. I get a ½ ounce, sometimes 3/4 ounce spinnerbait, depending on how deep those weed patches are. And I'll bring it right along the sides or right over the top of those patches. And I'll just, not necessarily slow roll it, but bring it at a slow enough pace where it goes along the bottom, horizontally to the bottom, so you're not bringing it up. So you may have to slow down a little bit slower and slower as it gets closer to you to maintain that trajectory. And play around with that speed, play around with that cadence to figure out what the fish want that day. But a spinnerbait can be very, very effective. Another lure that I use to go after these weeds, and also, say they're on a hump, and they're sitting on top of the hump, and there's weed beds on top of the hump, or rocks, or some logs. Maybe it's a primary or secondary point. Great bait to use is a jig. I'll use a 3/8 ounce jig and cast it along those weed edges. As I said, weeds are key, so that's where I'm going to go after first with a jig. Just let it fall vertically right down. A nice slow fall is what you want. So 3/8 ounce jig, even though it's deeper water, I'll stick with that 3/8 ounce unless it's windy. If the wind is picking up, it's a little more difficult to maintain contact with that bait. And so I'll use a ½ ounce, maybe a 3/4 ounce. But a slow fall is really what you want because it looks like a bait fish or something that's dying. There we go.
Yeehaw! We got a fish. We have a smallie or large?
We got a large one.
We got a largemouth. A nice largemouth too. Nice fatty.
Look at that.
Look at the light color.
Boy, he's cold.
I bet he is cold.
Cold water jig fishing. Now, if those fish have pulled off, that front's come through and they pull off into that creek channel, or maybe they're on top of the humps and now they're off to the sides or on the bottom, or they pulled off a little bit deeper off those points where there aren't weeds, then I'll break out a football head jig. And I want to get down the bottom and just crawl it really slow. Football head jig, as you crawl on the bottom, it wobbles like this. And it looks like a little crawdad, the whole body of it, the claws up and sticking up and everything like this, and it just wobbles on the bottom. Real slow with long pauses in between. Usually that gets a bite. However, I've noticed sometimes that the fish will pick it up and spit it out right away, or they don't bite it very long, or they don't hold on to it very well, and you don't get a good hook set. When that happens, that's when I break out my secret bait, and that's a tube. A tube jig works very, very well this time of year. It resembles both a bait fish and a crawdad. It collapses when the fish bites it, so they hold on to it longer. Plus, you can put scent in it, which allows them to hold on even longer. So if the fish are nipping at those jigs, or you're not getting hook sets on them, that's a good indication you should flip to a tube jig. Usually a 3.5 inch or 4 inch tube works really, really well. I use an open head jig with the eye. It's a 90-degree eye, a little bit offset from the front, so that when you drop it on slack line, it just gives this nice death spiral. Looks just like a dying bait fish. Perfect for the fall. That works really, really well. I'm using like an 1/8 ounce weight, real lightweight. And I will do that as long as I'm not getting hung up on anything. That is the primary way that I'll fish it. But if those fish want something on the bottom and barely moving, then I'll use a jig that's, it's a Texas rig, so it doesn't get hung up, and I'll put it like behind a split shot or or on a drop shot rig, and get it down there nice and deep. Texas rig it so it doesn't get hung up on anything, and I'll move it real slow. Just drag it on the bottom. Just don't even let it pop up the bottom. Those fish are real reluctant to bite. That often gets the best bite of all when they're very, very finicky. Something about a tube they can't resist, and so you can still salvage the day and catch some fish even when the bite is slow in the late fall. So those are the main baits I use. That's the tactics and approach I use in the late fall. I hope that works for you. For more tips and tricks like this, visit bassresource.com.